My ex texted demanding I pay for her new wedding. You owe me for the years I wasted. I replied, interesting calculation. Then I sent her an itemized bill for all the debts she racked up on my credit cards during our wasted years. Her new fiancé saw the bill and was now calling her for answers. I, 32M, never thought my ex would have the audacity to reach out after 3 years of silence, especially not with what she was asking for. But there I was, staring at my phone screen in complete disbelief as her message lit up my notifications. She wanted me to contribute to her wedding fund. Not just any contribution either. She was demanding $15,000 because, according to her twisted logic, I owed her for the years she wasted being with me. The sheer nerve of it made my coffee taste bitter that Tuesday morning. Let me back up. My ex and I dated for 4 years, lived together for 2 of those, and I genuinely thought she was the one. I was working 60-hour weeks at a consulting firm, pulling in decent money, while she bounced between part-time jobs and what she called finding herself. I didn't mind supporting us both financially because I loved her and believed in our future together. What I didn't realize was how she'd been systematically using my credit cards for everything from designer clothes to expensive dinners with friends, racking up debt faster than I could track. When I finally discovered the extent of it, nearly $40,000 across multiple cards, she acted like it was no big deal. We were a team, she said. Couples share everything, she said. The breakup was messy. She moved out while I was at work one day, taking half the furniture we'd bought together and leaving me with a mountain of debt and a lease I couldn't afford alone. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. I spent the next year digging myself out of that financial hole while she immediately started posting pictures with her new boyfriend on social media. Now, 3 years later, she was getting married to that same guy and had the unmitigated gall to demand I fund part of their special day. Her message was a masterpiece of entitlement wrapped in victimhood. She explained how those 4 years with me had set back her life plans, how she could have been focusing on her career instead of playing house with someone who wasn't emotionally available. She claimed I owed her for the opportunities she'd missed, the personal growth I'd stunted, and the therapy she'd needed to recover from our relationship. The more I read, the angrier I got. But then something shifted. Instead of rage, I felt something much more dangerous, clarity. I pulled out my laptop and opened a spreadsheet. If she wanted to play the accounting game, I was more than happy to oblige. After all, I'd kept meticulous records of everything during our relationship, partly because of my job and partly because even then, something had felt off about our finances. I started with the credit card statements. Nordstrom purchases totaling $3,000. Restaurant bills where she'd ordered bottles of wine that cost more than my monthly car payment. A weekend spa retreat with her friends that I'd apparently funded without even knowing it. The numbers added up quickly. Then I moved to the bigger items. The vacation to Europe she'd insisted we take, charged entirely to my cards while she claimed her account was temporarily frozen. The designer handbags she'd bought as investments. The monthly subscription boxes for everything from makeup to organic snacks that she'd signed up for using my payment information. But I didn't stop there. I calculated the rent for our apartment during the 2 years we lived together, minus her minimal contributions. I included utilities, groceries, car insurance for the vehicle she drove, but wasn't technically on the title for, and even the monthly payments on furniture that had mysteriously disappeared when she moved out. The spreadsheet grew to 3 pages. Every line item was documented with dates, amounts, and even photos where I still had them. By the time I finished, the total was staggering, $63,000 for $127. I sat back and looked at my work. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about justice. About someone finally holding her accountable for the trail of financial destruction she'd left in her wake. I spent another hour crafting my response. I kept it professional, almost businesslike in tone. I thanked her for reaching out and acknowledged her request for financial assistance with her wedding. I mentioned that I'd given serious thought to her claim about wasted years and the debt I apparently owed her for lost opportunities. Then I attached the spreadsheet. I explained that I'd done my own calculation of our relationship finances and discovered that she actually owed me a substantial sum. I outlined how I'd arrived at the numbers, complete with supporting documentation. I even offered to set up a payment plan if the full amount was too much to handle at once, suggesting she could contribute $1,000 monthly to chip away at her debt. The cherry on top was my closing line, that once she'd settled her outstanding balance with interest, I'd be happy to discuss contributing to her wedding fund. I hit send before I could second-guess myself. The response came faster than I expected. First, a string of messages calling me petty, vindictive, and obsessed. She accused me of being unable to let go of the past and claimed my spreadsheet was fabricated. She demanded I retract my ridiculous invoice and threatened to expose my harassment to mutual friends. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Update 1. 3 days later, my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something told me to answer. The voice on the other end was male, nervous, and introduced himself as her fiancé. He'd seen my spreadsheet. Apparently, my ex had left her laptop open, and he'd stumbled across our email exchange while looking for wedding venue information. He wanted to know if the numbers were real. I confirmed they were and offered to provide additional documentation if needed. There was a long pause before he asked about specific items on the list. The Europe trip, particularly. She'd told him that vacation was a gift from her wealthy aunt. The designer handbags were supposedly inherited from her grandmother. The furniture that had vanished from our apartment, she'd claimed it belonged to her family. I answered his questions honestly, but without editorializing. I didn't trash talk her or try to poison his opinion. I simply confirmed the facts as I knew them and provided context when asked. By the end of our 20-minute conversation, his voice had changed completely. The nervous energy was gone, replaced by something much colder. He thanked me for my time and hung up. Update 2. A week passed without any contact from either of them. I started to think the whole thing had blown over until my phone exploded with notifications on Friday evening. My ex was calling repeatedly, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails. In the first few, she was still trying to maintain her victim narrative, claiming her fiancé was being unreasonable and that I'd deliberately sabotaged her relationship. But as the messages continued, her story began to crack. It turned out her fiancé had done some investigating of his own. He'd found additional evidence of her spending habits, including recent purchases made on his credit cards that she hadn't disclosed. Large purchases. When he'd confronted her about the pattern of behavior my spreadsheet had revealed, she'd apparently tried to deflect by claiming I was an ex who couldn't move on. That's when he'd started looking deeper. He'd discovered she'd opened a store credit card in his name without permission. She'd been intercepting the bills and making minimum payments to keep him from finding out. The credit limit was nearly maxed out with purchases ranging from clothes to home decor for their shared apartment. But the real kicker was what he'd found when he'd started asking questions about her employment history. She'd been claiming to work full-time at a marketing firm, but when he'd called to arrange a surprise lunch delivery, he'd learned she'd been let go 3 months earlier. She'd been lying about having a job while using his money to maintain her lifestyle. In her final voicemail, she was sobbing, begging me to call her fiancé and tell him that my spreadsheet was exaggerated, that our relationship had been different than what the numbers suggested. She promised to pay me back everything if I'd just help her fix things with him. I deleted the messages without responding. Update 3. The wedding was supposed to be this past weekend. I know because she'd mentioned the date in her original demand for money, and I'd made a note of it in my calendar out of morbid curiosity. Monday morning, I got a call from a number I'd stored but never expected to hear from again, her fiancé. The wedding was off. Not postponed, not delayed, completely canceled. He'd called off the engagement after discovering the full scope of her deception. Beyond the financial issues, he learned about her pattern of lying that extended far beyond money. The job loss was just the beginning. She'd been fabricating stories about family emergencies to explain sudden expenses, had claimed to be attending graduate school classes that didn't exist, and had even lied about basic things like where she'd spent her afternoons. He'd confronted her with everything he'd discovered, including my spreadsheet, and given her a chance to come clean. Instead, she'd doubled down on her lies, claiming I'd manipulated the financial records and that he was being paranoid and controlling. That's when he'd known the relationship was over. He called to thank me, which felt surreal. He said my spreadsheet had opened his eyes not just to the money issues, but to a pattern of behavior that could have destroyed his financial future. He'd already started the process of removing her access to his accounts and credit cards, and was working with his bank to dispute the charges she'd made without permission. But then he told me something that made my blood run cold. She'd already moved on. Less than a week after their breakup, she was posting pictures with someone new on social media. Someone who looked successful, well-dressed, financially stable. The same type of guy she'd targeted when she'd moved on from me. He'd tried to warn the new guy, reaching out through mutual connections, but had been told to mind his own business. Some people, he said, have to learn these lessons the hard way. After hanging up, I found myself thinking about that new guy. Some stranger who had no idea what he was getting into, who would probably spend the next few months or years getting financially bled dry while thinking he was in love. I realized my ex hadn't changed at all. She'd just found her next mark. For a moment, I considered trying to warn him myself. But then I remembered how I would have reacted if some random ex had tried to tell me who I was dating. I would have thought he was jealous, bitter, unable to move on. Sometimes people have to make their own mistakes. As for my ex's original demand for wedding money, I never heard about it again. No apology for the debt she'd left me with, no acknowledgement of the financial damage she'd caused, no recognition that her wasted years had cost me far more than they'd cost her. But that spreadsheet had served its purpose. It hadn't just exposed her lies to her fiancé, it had finally given me closure. Seeing all those numbers laid out in black and white had somehow made the past feel finite, containable, something that belonged to history rather than something that could still hurt me. I printed out a copy of the spreadsheet and filed it away with all my other important documents. Not because I expected to need it again, but because it represented something important. Proof that I'd learned to stand up for myself, that I wouldn't be taken advantage of again, and that sometimes the best revenge is simply telling the truth. My ex had taught me an expensive lesson about trust and financial boundaries. In the end, she'd inadvertently done me a favor. I was stronger, smarter, and more careful with both my money and my heart. And I never had to pay for her wedding.